Welcome to the very first episode of Rodcast Unscripted, where we talk about life, culture, and the true Filipino-American experience. I'm your host, Rod Mercado. I have been living here in the US for about 2 decades. At dahil sa negosyo ko, ang financial rescue, iba't ibang Filipino-Americans ang nakasalumuha ko. Iba't ibang kwento, iba't ibang pagsisikap, at iba't ibang tagumpay. And I want to celebrate that through this podcast. This is where we share the Filipino-American life, culture, and everything in between. Real talk, real people. Ang pag-uusapan natin ngayon is about the true essence of celebrating Filipino-American History Month. Take note, it's not Filipino-American Heritage Month, it's History Month. For 2025, the theme is From Quotas to Communities, Filipino-American Migration and Movement. Today, we're joined by Atty. Rodel Rodis, a respected Filipino-American lawyer, advocate, and community leader, and has dedicated much of his life to serving and empowering the Filipino-American community. Beyond the courtroom, Atty. Rodis has also been a public servant, educator, and columnist, always championing Filipino voices and representation. He's also one of the founders of National Federation of Filipino-American Associations. With his deep knowledge of our history and experience in community work, he's a perfect guest to help us uncover the true essence of Filipino-American History Month. Welcome, Atty. Rodel Rodis.
Thank
Kamusta,
you,
sir?
Rod.
Yeah. Kamusta po? Bago po natin umpisan yung pinaka-core ng discussion natin, pwede niyo ba kami bigyan ng kaunting history? Kailan ba unang nagpunta rito yung mga Filipinos at paano ba nag-umpisa na na-recognize ang Philippine or magkaroon ng isang buwan na celebration na intended lang para sa mga Pilipino?
Okay, thank you, Rod. Traditionally, whenever they teach Filipino-American history in all the colleges and universities, they present it as 3 waves of migration. The first wave being Filipinos who came as part of farm workers from 1906 all the way until 1946. And the second wave were Filipinos who came as stewards or working in the U.S. Navy or generally in the military experience. And then the third wave was from 1965 to the present, when the Immigration Act was expanded to allow for Filipino professionals to come. From 1946 to 1965, the quota for the Philippines was only 50 a year.
Oh.
Before 1935, there was no limit because Filipinos were not foreigners. They were considered national, so they were not subject to the quotas that were given to the rest of the world.
Okay.
But after, so from 1946 to 1965, there was 50 a year, except those who served in the U.S. military and who brought their families. So other than that, non-U.S. military was only 50 a year. 1965 was the breakthrough because it allowed for up to 20,000 a year for different countries based on certain immigration categories.
Okay.
So that is what expanded our presence. But that categorization of first, second, and third waves is not accurate.
Okay.
The more accurate one is from 1587 to 1906, and that is the mariner wave.
Okay.
Mariners are sailors, those who were brought here on board the galleon ships that went to Acapulco, but many of the Filipinos who went there did not return back to Manila. Many of them made their way to the U.S., and then later on, when Filipino sailors, mariners, were being brought to the U.S. ports like New Orleans and others, they were the ones who set up the Filipino-American villages in Barataria Bay in New Orleans, the Manila Men of Louisiana, as one author called it. And then the second wave were from 1906 until 1945. So it's really 4 waves of migration.
Mhm.
but we have to start at 1587 instead of 1906. So recognizing the arrival of Filipinos in New Orleans in Morro Bay, California, on October 18, 1587, is what has brought about the Filipino-American History Month,
Mhm.
when the Filipino-American National Historical Society pushed for celebrating 1 month as Filipino-American History Month, and it would be October because it happened on October 18, 1587.
Wow. And then, from that time on, saan po ba nag-settle yung mga Filipinos?
Well, the Filipinos settled all over the U.S. One of the founders of what was the settlement in Los Angeles was a Filipino.
The
And
Cordovas?
then,
Sila ba yung mga Cordovas? O hindi?
no, that was before LA became a city. It was a Spanish settlement, and one of the 8 people who came, I forgot his name right now, but he came with among many Filipinos who would go to Acapulco. See, from about 1572, when Father Urdaneta and Miguel Lopez de Legazpi developed the Philippines. By the way, they were not Spaniards, they were Mexican Spaniards. The Philippines was a colony of a colony. The ones that were sent to the Philippines to settle were not from Spain. They were from Mexico.
Oh, wow.
So a lot of the a lot of the cultural traditions in the Philippines came from Mexico. We had the celebration of the Simbang Gabi. That came from Mexico, and a lot of the dances of the Philippines came from the Mexican hat dance and everything else. The
Wow.
La Jota Moncadena all came from Mexico, which of course came from Spain, but the direct link was more Mexican than it was Spanish.
Okay.
It was later on, after Mexico declared its independence, that the Spanish would send directly from Spain to the Philippines, no longer through Mexico.
Ano naman po ang role nila Dr. Fred Cordova and Dorothy Cordova? Sometime in 1992.
Yes, the Fred and Dorothy, I've known them since 1971. In fact, when my wife and I were married, it was Fred and Dorothy who were our ninong in 1979. I was looking at our marriage certificate, and the ones who signed was Fred and Dorothy Cordova.
Okay.
So they were our sponsors. But I've known them since 71. And when and Fred and Dorothy were born in the U.S. in Stockton, and so their experience is the Filipino-American experience. They in Seattle, they set up the Filipino Youth Activities of Seattle, where they taught Filipino-American youth. They had what do you call those? The dance. It's not a dance, but it's where they perform at halftime, and football shows where you have. And so many young Filipino-Americans were joining and learning about their history for the first time through the FYA of Seattle. So they were the ones who pioneered studying Filipino-American history. So when they founded the Filipino-American National Historical Society, and I was a member of the first board of directors, so that was pivotal. And one of the leaders and founders of FUNS was Peter Jamero. And Peter and his wife, Terry, were the ones who pushed for Filipino-American History Month. So they pioneered it. FUNS was the one that pushed it. And that's why in 2009, Governor Jerry Brown, I believe, was the one who initiated it in California.
I just noticed, Rodel, the Cordovas introduced actually the October as the Filipino-American History Month.
Yes.
And that was in 1992.
Yes.
But it took several years before Congress acknowledged that month.
Well,
And that was in 2009.
right.
Rather. So,
Right. It was recognized first in California, and then the members of the California congressional delegation pushed it. And so they celebrated it, and it became a national celebration.
right.
So that was to tell people we're not recent immigrants. We've been here, and we have every right to have a say in our history, in our lives. That we have to be part of the fabric of American life. We have to have a seat at the table, not just in the gallery watching from outside, but part of those inside making decisions that affect our lives.
So in my introduction, I mentioned that October is History Month, not Heritage Month. But other people would insist, or I don't know whether, not really insist, but they also consider October as a Heritage Month. What's your opinion about that?
Well, it was called Filipino-American History Month, but there are many places in the country where it's recent immigrants who live there primarily. So they don't have a sense of the history of Filipinos in America, because their history is of coming here after 1965. So what they see as history is from 1965. So they want to celebrate the heritage. So many of the events consist of showing Philippine dances, Philippine costumes, Philippine traditions. So it's more emphasizing the heritage rather than the history.
Yeah.
So it's important. That's the reason it was created, was that we want everyone, the community, but also the non-Filipino community, the broader American community, to appreciate our history in America as having a long history. And because we have a long history, if someone were to say, go back to where you came from, you can say, hey, we were here before your ancestors came to this country. So don't tell us to go back. You know, the Indian Native Americans can tell you to go back where you came from, but not them.
So sasabihin niyo ba na from the very beginning, ang advocacy talaga ng group na to is to
understand our
the
history
of the Filipino
Right.
Okay, so that's very clear. So, but it's not, would you consider it not complementing the History Month by also celebrating the heritage of the Filipinos?
Well, it is, but for example, my complaint in San Francisco is every time we celebrate Filipino-American History Month, the main guest has always been the Consul General of the Philippines. They're given a prominent role in the speeches, in everything that is done is always with the Consul General. Now, if it was Filipino-American Heritage Month, that would be appropriate because they represent the Philippines and the heritage of the Philippines is what's being showcased. But they shouldn't be the main focus when we're celebrating Filipino-American History Month. So that's been my complaint. I've been attending all of the events at City Hall, and it's always been, the emphasis has always been the Philippine consulate, the Philippine Consul General and his wife, who are great people. I've known many of them over the years. I have no complaint with them as individuals. My complaint is, why are they the focus? Why is not the Filipinos like Carlos Bolosan, Philip Veracruz, Larry Leong? Why don't we focus on all these people who developed and worked for the improvement and the development and the empowerment of Filipinos in America rather than representing the Philippines?
Yeah. Na-mention niyo was it Larry Leong?
Yes.
Ano po bang ginawa niya noong mga panahon na yun?
You know, before 1965, the image of Filipinos in the media and culture was generally as houseboys or people who worked in the fields or who were stewards in the U.S. Navy. There was one Filipino general who joined the U.S. military, and he was allowed in, but he became a steward, from a general in the Philippine Army to a steward in the U.S. Navy. And so it's been a very subservient position. But Larry was the primary organizer of what became the United Filipino Workers Union, the UFW. He had been organizing, he was working for the AFL-CIO to organize agricultural workers. In fact, they had the the United Farm Workers Organizing Committee, the UFWOC, and he was the one who headed it, and he was organizing in all the fields. Each time he would organize, they would be able to push for increase in the wages. When he went to Delano, he saw Delano had so many Filipino agricultural workers. And the history was that every time the workers would fight for a strike, the Mexicans would be brought in when they would go off work. So they would scab against the Filipinos. And when the Mexicans went on strike, the Filipinos would scab them. Yeah. So the growers had a great time being able to pit the Mexicans and the Filipinos. But in 1965, when Larry Leong was organizing the Filipinos to go on strike, he knew what the growers would do. So he went to Cesar Chavez, who was leading the Mexican farm workers. Okay. And he said, we're going to go on strike. If we go on strike and you scab us, when you go on strike, we're going to scab you, and that's only going to make the growers helpful. So he implored on them, he asked them to please join us in our strike. And there was a meeting at the Guadalupe Church in Delano, and where it was filled with Mexican farm workers and Filipino farm workers. And Larry made an impassioned plea for the Mexican workers to join the Filipinos in going on strike. And Cesar Chavez spoke and said, we have to join the Filipinos, or otherwise we will never be able to go ahead. So when he made that call, because it was Larry who kept pressing him, join us or else nothing will happen to us. And Cesar agreed. That strike was the first time in the history of the United States that you had a very active unionization of farm workers. And that's what led to the improvement in the wages and working conditions of Mexican and Filipino farm workers. That's why the Farm Workers Union not only had Cesar Chavez number one, Larry Leong was number two, and there were 3 Filipino vice presidents, as well as Dolores Huerta was one, and Philip Veracruz and the Imutan. And they were the ones who brought the Farm Workers Union. But the unfortunate thing, not unfortunate, but the farm workers from the Philippines came in the 30s. After 1946, there were no more farm workers coming in, but the Mexicans were coming in. So by 1965, there weren't any Filipino farm workers to get the benefit of the work that Larry Leong and the others did. So it became primarily a Mexican union, and the Filipinos who were dying off, that was the unfortunate, that what we started, we were not able to get the benefit of as because of the historical developments.
Sa tingin mo ba the Filipino-American history celebration is still relevant to this day?
It is, but I wish there would be more focus on the history part. For example, the first Filipinos came on October 18, 1587. But the second group of Filipinos to come was in November 5, 1595, about 8 years later, when the San Agustin arrived. The one in 1587 was the Nuestra Señora de Buena Esperanza under Captain Pedro Unamuno. But in 1595, there was the San Agustin that landed right here in Point Reyes. And that one was actually more interesting because the Filipinos who were on that ship, when it landed in Point Reyes, actually connected with the Miwok Indians that were in Point Reyes. It's an interesting sidelight, but if you go to Marin County, the biggest casino there is the Graton Casino. The head of the Graton Casino, the chairman of the board, is a Filipino Miwok. And he knows the history of Filipinos landing in 1595 in Point Reyes. But that I wrote about this and I said, why aren't we celebrating the Filipinos who landed in? It's like we know about 1587 and then suddenly it goes to 1763 when Filipinos landed in Barataria Bay, that whole history of the Manila men of Louisiana. But there's been a lot of history that has happened, but there's not been a focus on that, which should be the focus of Filipino-American History Month.
Tingin nyo, ano yung mga pwede sanang, kung we're really doing it as a History Month, ano ba yung pwede maging beneficio ng mga Filipino-Americans dito sa US? If we concentrate on that.
Well, a lot of it is education. In the past, when Rob Bonta was elected to the California legislature in 2013, the very first resolution or bill or act that he pushed through the California Assembly was one that would teach the history of Filipino farm workers in California to be part of the curriculum of the unified, of the K to 12, that they would learn about the contributions of Filipino-Americans. So at an early age, they would know. So when a lot of them grow older, they would be able to understand. The problem is that Filipinos coming from the Philippines don't go to elementary school. I mean, they're already older, so the kids might know about Filipino-American history because of the bill of now Attorney General Rob Bonta. But those from the Philippines, they need to be educated about it. And so if you don't have the education, you're not going to be able to know everything, what you should know. I mean, there's a slogan of, it says, no history, no self, KNOW, but no history, NO, no self. That shows the importance of having a grounding in our history to know ourselves.
Yeah. Honestly, I know probably a lot of Filipino history back home. Like, ano nangyari doon, panahon ng Hapon, panahon ng Mercado, etc. But here, the story of Filipino-Americans, napaka-bago sa akin. As a matter of fact, it's only now that I'm learning a lot from you. So, isa sa mga kung kayo po ba ay, if you were to do a call to action, paano ba ninyo i-encourage, for example, ang mga Filipino-Americans? Anong klaseng contribution they should be doing? And kung may mga organizations na mga Filipino organizations na napakarami sa ating bansa ngayon, what would you encourage them to do to make this month, which is the Filipino-American History Month, be more relevant, not only today but also in the future?
Well, I think there should be more systematic effort to know our history in America. But so there should be more educational activities. There should be efforts like what happened in Union City, where they were able to name a middle school, the Larry Leong Philip Vera Cruz Middle School. So people who attend those schools are able to know about the history when it's happening. Um, my complaint, for example, is Daly City has 35% Filipino population. At one time, 4 of the 5 members of the Daly City Council were Filipinos. Now it's 3 out of 5. But yet, if you look at what schools, what parks, what streets in Daly City have been named after Filipinos. I
Buti
mean,
pa
there's
Nevada.
one now. Alice Bulos, there's one, but every ethnic group that has been part of Daly City, when the Italians were the predominant, you saw Italian schools, Italian streets. Latinos, there are, but Filipinos don't have the sense that we have to have parks, streets, schools named after Filipinos who have contributed to the U.S. so that kids growing up will be able to say, hey, look, we have a school. We're right now trying to have a bust made of Alice Bulos in South San Francisco, and we're talking to them. And they told us there's only one bust in the entire city of the South San Francisco, and it was set up in 1930, and it's of George Washington. So we said, well, it's time for a second bust, and it will be about Alice Bulos because it has to show what contributions we've made. But if we can have projects like that, that would go a long way in terms of educating our community that we are not just recent immigrants. We're not bagong salta. We've been in this country for more than 500 years, longer than many other Europeans who have come from different parts, who claim to be more American than anyone. And we say we have a long history.
In terms of recognition of the contribution of Filipino-Americans, like halimbawa sa Nevada, recently I heard, now we have the Filipino town in Nevada.
Vegas, yes.
Bakit wala sa Daly City? Is that something we can also do in Daly City? Considering, as you mentioned, 35% of the Filipino-Americans in at least maybe Northern California live in Daly City. That would be nice to have something there, right?
That would be very nice. That we have to start thinking like that because the idea of us as recent immigrants and we're just starting to learn, that means we haven't learned. If we knew our long history in the U.S., then we can start acting more like we have as much right to be in this country as any Italian American or any other group from Europe. And so we're going to demand our place at the table.
As we mentioned earlier, meron ng Filipino town, right? Bakit wala pa tayo niyan sa San Francisco?
Well, actually, we've had one from the 1930s, tawag known as Manila Town. It's still called that now, and it used to be the outer part of Chinatown was Manila Town. It consisted of many old hotels where Filipinos who were working in the farms, during the off season, they would come to San Francisco and they would stay in the low cost housing, and sometimes one room would be occupied by 5 or 6 Filipino farm workers who were living there. And over the years, with redevelopment, that area started becoming smaller and smaller until finally it was just one block on Kearney, what was the Manila Town, and the I Hotel, the International Hotel, was the last hotel where Filipino farm workers were living. I lived at the I Hotel when I first came to the U.S. My first 6 months in the U.S. was paying $50 a month for a small room at the I Hotel. And my roommates were farm workers who came in the 1930s. So I learned about the history of Filipinos from them.
Okay.
And later, when there was a teaching position that opened at state to teach Filipino-American history, I applied. And when they were asking about the history, I knew a lot from my conversations with
Correct.
the Manon and my reading as many books about the history of Filipinos America in the library. So I got the teaching position based on that. But now that Manila town, which was in the Chinatown area, in the 1950s, when Filipinos started coming, the families in the 60s, after the Filipinos who were coming lived in the South of Market area, in from about 2nd Street all the way to 10th and 11th, from Mission all the way to 4 or 5 blocks. So in the small little alleys, that's where Filipinos were living. St. Patrick's Church was almost 70% Filipinos because of the area around it. And even other churches started having it. And now that's been recognized as Soma Filipinas, that's South of Market area. Soma Filipinas. We were able to name a park there, the Victoria Manalo Draves Park, after a Filipino-American who grew up, was born and raised in South of Market, and went on to win 2 gold medals in the 1948 London Olympics. And so we had a chance to have her as our guest when at City College of San Francisco, because she attended, and we recognized her as the most outstanding alumnus of City College. So that's part of learning about our history. So as we go through, there's now a Centro Filipino on Mission Street that has regular events. So it's expanding beyond the tiny little enclave of Manila town in Chinatown. So it's now there, but I wish it could be developed more like what they have in Las Vegas, with shops, restaurants, bookstores. There are some. Bayanihan Center on 6th and Mission is one, but there could be more. And it's on its way, hopefully.
Ang muli ko pong tanong sa inyo, sa tingin niyo ba we're doing enough to make this month talagang very relevant? Or what would you suggest? I asked you earlier about this, but mas gusto ko mag-focus on what can we really do. I mentioned about individuals, and then what about organization? Like, for example, you and myself are trustees of National Federation of Filipino-American Association. Napakagandang adikain, meron ang NAFA. So, sa tingin ba ninyo, organization like NAFA can really help in promoting and making this month more relevant para magkaroon naman talaga tayo ng recognition at bosses para dito sa US?
Yes, and because there's so much to do, sometimes it can be paralyzing, by thinking, oh my God, it's so much to do. But we have to start little projects like what we're doing in South San Francisco for Alice Bullock, what some other schools are doing. There have been efforts in San Francisco to build a monument even to Dr. Jose Rizal. Now, that has not been successful. There are no monuments to Dr. Jose Rizal or any Filipino in San Francisco, but we were able to get 4 small streets in the South of Market to be called Andres Bonifacio, Jose Rizal, Polinario Mabini, and Tandang Sora. Those are the only 4 there. But we just have to do more to educate the broader American community, but we can't do that unless we educate our own Filipino-American community. And that means just not being satisfied, because it's easy to celebrate Filipino-American Heritage Month because there's so much of our culture, the food, the dancing, the clothes. It's much more difficult to understand the history of Filipino-Americans in the U.S. because that's why it's called Filipino-American History Month. So if we can just tell people what's our Filipino-American history and why are we celebrating a month dedicated to Filipino-American history, then the answer to that question is what will lead to greater consciousness and greater action.
Any last words or audience?
Well, I hope people were educated and will start working towards educating themselves, know history, know self.
Maraming salamat, Rodel. Napaka-insightful ng ating discussion today. And I'm sure maraming mga audience natin ngayon, mga Filipino-Americans na maaring first time lang din yung narinig tong history na to, na itong ganitong discussion, narratives about Filipino-Americans in the US. And sana maging daan ito para parang to educate. Like myself, it's only now that I'm learning a lot about Filipino-Americans history, and I really appreciate your presence here. So thank you for joining us today. Salamat po for listening. Let's keep the kwentuhan going. Subscribe now and ring that bell so you're always part of the conversation. Salamat po.